Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Peak Human. Took a little break there. Got so much going on. Got the Sapien Center pretty much open. We had a soft opening. It was amazing. If you're in Austin, even if you're not in Austin, check out sapiencenter.com. All it is a landing page, but you can apply to be a member. It's invite only. It's a special place. We're doing events. If you know anyone who wants to do an event, that is open to the public. We will have the Nose to Tail food truck open to the public, but the social club, private health club, is for members only. Check it out, sapiencenter.com. So on to today's guest, Dr. Bill Davis. What a great guy. He wrote Wheat Belly. He wrote a new book called Super Gut. He is the man. We're actually going to get him in the film. Really like his take on things. He is a fan of the Sapien diet and lifestyle. Dr. William Davis is a cardiologist, a New York Times #1 best-selling author of the Wheat Belly book series, and is the medical director and founder of the Undoctored program, including the Undoctored Inner Circle, where he helps individuals take back control of their gut, health, and lifestyle. Dr. Bill is also the chief medical officer and co-founder of Realize Therapeutics Corp. that is developing innovative solutions for the disrupted human microbiome, and the author of the book Super Gut. The microbiome is so important. I really do think it's the root of so much of disease. Food contacts your gut in such a big way. It matters so much what types of food you're putting in your bodies. That's why a calorie is not a calorie. There's so much more to it. We get into all kinds of cool stuff. I really think you're going to enjoy this one. I'm glad to be back. I'm still looking for new guests. Please reach out to me if you have any suggestions. I have so little time these days. I work on the Food Lies film every single day, up to 11 p.m. most nights. This is the only way I can fit in everything I need to do during the day. I have long calls with the director and editor. We go over the film, we go over the footage, we go over the graphics, tinkering with the script. We're going on another film tour to get more interviews. We even have to redo interviews. This is so important. We are going all out. This film is going to be something very special, and it is taking quite a while. I'm also working to bring this great community in Austin together with Sapien Center. This is so important to me, to build this tribe, to have a real place where we can interact like humans again, have a tribe of maybe 100 to 150 people like the old days. It's a special place for special people. Again, that's sapiencenter.com. Apply to be a member. And then, of course, Nose to Tail. Nose to Tail. I'm trying to fit that in as well. Great company, getting you regenerative meat, getting pasture-raised chicken and pork, fed on special low PUFA diets, organic, no funny stuff. All of these family ranchers are doing the best ag, the best care of the animals, the best care of the land. This is really special meat. It's not cheap. I actually don't even make money on it. I don't pay myself. I actually just realized that I don't make money in Nose to Tail. I break even at best. This is something I just do for the community, for the ranchers. I'm telling you, there's so many costs associated with raising good meat and getting these products out there that there's nothing left. But it's fine because you guys get good meat. We ship it straight to you. I get to support the ranchers. I get to break even. I get to work on my other projects. I get to do this podcast. I get to interview amazing guests. I get to spend time with the amazing community online and here in Austin. So support us. I do have to pay my one employee, Matt. We're trying to do big things. We're trying to change the world. We're trying to get this film out there, the Food Lies film. We're trying to get Nose to Tail meat. We're trying to bring people together in person. We're trying to do all these things. So go to nosetotale.org, get the meat, the skincare. The skin food is finally coming back in stock. It was an insane journey with this summer heat, with our new big order, so we finally don't sell out. So many problems, but the stuff is so good. We also have the soap, we have the lip balm, we have the seasonings, we have the biltong. The biltong is so good. I've been bringing it everywhere I go around Austin and letting people try it. So you can try it yourself at nosetotale.org. Find out what else we're doing with the film, foodlies.org. Follow me on social media at foodlies. And enjoy this one with Dr. Bill Davis. All right, we're live with Dr. William Davis. How are you doing?
Oh, terrific, Brian. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Do you go by Bill, though?
Sure.
Dr. Bill over in Milwaukee. I went to Milwaukee once, semi-recently. I thought it was nice. You were complaining it wasn't cool enough. Cool. Maybe it is cold enough, but maybe not cool enough.
Climate change has been good to us because it's become more temperate. And the only downside we have is violent winds now and then.
Mm. Well, it was pretty cool when I visited. So we were talking about Austin beforehand. We were talking about the game changers, actually. You turned it off, I hear, or you couldn't watch it.
Well, if you're talking about the documentaries purporting to advertise how veganism and vegetarianism, it's a battle I try not to fight too often because it gets nasty. But, I remind people, if we looked at indigenous populations, there's this great show on cable TV. I think it's called Alone.
Mhm.
It's taking people who live out in the wilderness for extended periods. I give these people credit. That's a scary thing to do. But it's clear that if you don't kill things and eat them, you're going to starve in short order. And if you had to make your own clothes, how are you going to do that without getting an animal skin, right? You can't wear leaves, especially some
Yeah.
of the colder climates. You could go naked, of course, but if you wanted shoes, well, how do you do that? And so, as much as I hate to say it, we are bloodthirsty carnivorous creatures, and that's how we thrive. And the people who deny that have to, they must supplement vitamin B12. They can't get enough iron or zinc or omega 3 fatty acids. They don't appreciate that they're not getting any collagen or hyaluronic acid or phosphatidylserine. In other words, a long list of deficiencies. I think that's part of the reason why they're so angry is they lack brain nutrients and something happens to them emotionally. And so if you do that lifestyle, let's say you do it for sustainability reasons, you must compensate for it. And even then, you cannot reverse all the health phenomena of that lifestyle just by taking supplements. Some things you can't, like omega 3 fatty acids. You will not ever achieve a healthy level of omega 3 fatty acid in your bloodstream because you can't do it with chia and flaxseed, linolenic acid. It must be EPA, DHA. And likewise, if you lack collagen, you can have accelerated skin aging. You may have noticed they have exaggerated dry skin. They have the lack of collagen, accelerated skin aging, accelerated joint deterioration, and probably accelerated cognitive impairment. Likewise, the hyaluronic acid is the essential component to make joint lubrication as well as dermal lubrication and other forms of lubrication, including the vagina, cervix, and uterus. And they essentially dry out because you need hyaluronic acid. And if you don't get phosphatidylserine, well, you get brain deterioration, cognitive impairment. So on and on and on, Brian. There's just no logic behind following that lifestyle. And there is, as you know, there is no such data showing us that vegetarianism. There are misinterpretations of the data that suggest that, but there's no genuine interpretation nor study that shows that very unnatural lifestyle is somehow preferable or safe.
I see it all the time. Even I keep forgetting the doctor's name, the older vegan doctor who's kind of went insane. I think he has a lack of cholesterol too in his brain. Him and his wife, they I saw some clips of them just looking like they've gone completely insane. So, yeah, my crowd is not a vegan crowd, and I actually made a film the same length as Game Changers, debunking it. It's on YouTube. It's not like a good film like Food Lies will be, but I did that,
What's
and
it called, Brian?
yeah,
What's the name of the movie?
it's called Game Changers Debunked.
Ah, got it. Easy.
Game Changers Debunked. It's on my Food Lies YouTube channel. I did it in like 3 weeks. The crowd supported me. We had a good time with it. There's one version with the outtakes, deleted scenes where we did some skits to make fun, and then one without it. So yeah, people can look that up. But yeah, I was just looking at this stuff for the Food Lies film about the hunter gatherers. There was an ethnographic atlas study. They did study 229 hunter gather tribes that still got their own food. Zero vegans. 73% of them got over 50% of their diet from animal foods, and there was only 8 out of the 229 that got less than 25% from animal foods. So it's very much like you said. Alone, the show has come up a lot of, you go out there, you try to live, you get animal foods. So we're on the same page. Absolutely. You wrote a great book called Wheat Belly that I read many years ago, and you have a new book called Super Gut, which I just finished reading. I'm on the last few pages there. I tried to finish it right before the show. And yeah, tell us more about Wheat Belly, though. Let's catch the audience up on what you've been up to. How long ago was that? And give us a recap.
Brian, the experience started many years ago. Like I can't remember now, 18 plus years ago, though the book came out in 2011. But it was I did this just because of one thing. I started a place called Milwaukee Heart Scan. This is 27 years ago, a long time ago. It was a new emerging technology to screen people for heart disease because my mom underwent two stent implantations for coronary disease, and then she died of sudden cardiac death after. I'm not sorry, not stents, just angioplasty. But then she died of sudden cardiac death. And here I am. She lived in New Jersey at the time where I grew up, and I was in Milwaukee. I just moved here because they brought me here to establish new technologies, stent implantation, various forms of atherectomy, balloon angioplasties, all that kind of stuff. And here my mom dies of the disease that I tried to manage in patients. And so it struck me that how silly it was to try to manage a disease in a procedure laboratory because people like my mom die before they even get to the hospital, die before they can even dial 911 or die en route or something like that. So I wanted to find a way where we could identify people 2 years, 5 years, 10 years before. And of course, cholesterol is not that tool. Cholesterol is almost a joke. It's ridiculous, but it drives a lot of money. And if it makes money, you can persuade my colleagues, you can brainwash them with silly studies that are paid for by the drug industry largely and persuade them this is what the real tragedy, by the way, Brian, of the statin drug industry and of the low-fat diet message is that it took everybody's focus off the real causes for heart disease. That's why there's been no reduction in heart disease, yet they have $70 million facilities at hospitals to support the number one money-making disease, heart disease. No one's preventing it, but they make a lot of money not preventing it. That's the perverse equation of modern healthcare, especially cardiac care. It's wrong. I find it personally disgusting. It's not about health and human safety. It's about money. Well, I started this place, Milwaukee Heart Scan. It was one of the first in the Midwest, first one in Wisconsin, one of the few in the country at the time, many years ago. And we're scanning people. It measures calcium in atherosclerotic plaque because my friend Dr. John Runberg, when he was at Mayo, showed that 20% of all plaque is occupied by calcium. So calcium is an indirect, like a dipstick, a gauge of total plaque. And the more calcium or more plaque you have, the more likely you are to have a heart attack, die, whatever. So we're scanning people left and right. And when you look for hidden heart disease, Brian, you find it everywhere. So for instance, guy comes in and says, I'm 52, but my dad had his first heart attack in a bypass surgery at age 57. Is that in my future also? He gets a scan, a score, let's say 500. 0 is normal. Everything above is increasing degrees of plaque formation. Well, he's at 500 and he's at risk. He's got several percent risk, like 7-8% in that range of dying or having a heart attack in the next few years. So we also help publish these data. If you do nothing, the score goes up 25% per year. A terrifying rate. It scares the hell out of people. If you take baby aspirin, low-fat diet, high dose of a statin cholesterol drug, exercise, it goes up 25% per year. Yet my colleagues have the gall to call this optimal medical therapy. It does virtually nothing. And so what do I do, though? I have people freaking out on me, thousands of them. What do I do? It's not stopping, right? Of course, my colleagues, many of them not very honest, say, we'll do the real test, the heart catheterization, and maybe put some stents in or put you through a bypass. Now, these are people like you and me. These aren't people in the ER with chest pain and can't breathe. These are people riding their bikes, going for walks, running, jogging. These are active people with no symptoms. So what I saw my colleagues doing is putting asymptomatic people through procedures that were not necessary. And it's become clear now, good evidence, when you put people like that through a major procedure, there is no benefit. Zero benefit. So, but we have these people with their increasing scores. So I looked at a whole bunch of different issues. And it took some years to figure out, but it led to all kinds of really cool lessons. Like the first time I added vitamin D, it was the first time I saw heart scan scores, not just slow. Before that, we had managed to slow down progression as low as 8 to 12% per year, but still growing. When I added vitamin D, it was the first time I saw scores plummet. 700 becomes 400 or something like that. Dramatic. And I look at, first time I saw it, I didn't believe it. It must have been a mistake. I went back to the scans and compared before and after. Yeah, the calcium had shrunk. Even though it's meant to score calcium, you can still see the contours of the other material. and the plaque had shrunk over and over and over again. I published some of those data, but one of the other technologies they use was not cholesterol testing, because cholesterol testing is ridiculous, but lipoprotein testing. Cholesterol was meant to be a crude, indirect gauge of lipoproteins, fat carrying proteins that carry fat in the bloodstream, because fats can't float freely in the bloodstream. They'd separate. And so we did mostly NMR, the nuclear magnetic resonance method of lipoprotein analysis. It became clear that virtually 100% of people with coronary disease don't have high cholesterol, but they have an excess of small LDL particles. Small LDL particles are long lasting. They persist in the bloodstream for 5 to 7 days rather than 24 hours, like a large LDL particle. They have a different conformation on the surface, so it's not recognized well by the liver, so it goes around and around in the circulation. It's more likely to adhere to the arterial wall. It's more likely to ignite an inflammatory response in the arterial wall. In other words, it has a lot of characteristics that make it well crafted to cause heart disease. And it was virtually 100% of people with coronary disease, except for smokers, by the way. Smokers can have heart disease with nothing else. An excess of small LDL particles. Well, I asked, what foods cause small LDL particles? That science was clear even 20 some years ago. Grains and sugars, period. So I asked these people, thousands of them, to take grains and sugars out of the diet. They'd come back, whatever, 3-6 months later, and they say, I did it. Small LDL is now zero, down from maybe 1,800 or 2,400. Or it goes down to some other low number, but virtually obliterated. But they'd say this to me. You didn't tell me I'd lose 47 pounds. My waist would shrink by 8 inches. I wouldn't have to take blood pressure medication anymore because my blood pressure would be low. Or that my blood sugar dropped so much I had to stop my metformin and insulin because my blood sugars are now normal. You didn't tell me my joint pain would go away, my skin rash would go away, that I'd be happier, I wouldn't be depressed anymore. So it became clear that I stumbled onto something for the purposes, Brian, of getting rid of small LDL particles in people with positive coronary calcium scores. But it became clear that something desperately wrong. And that's when I started to ask, why? Why would the food advocated by all dietitians, virtually all doctors, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, USDA, American Heart Association, American Diabetes Association, Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, they all agree you must cut your fat, eat healthy whole grains. And yet when you do the opposite, don't cut your fat, don't eat any grains, heart disease virtually goes away. And I thought, one of the turning points for me, though, was a 38-year-old school teacher who had ulcerative colitis. But I see her for palpitations, this flip-flop feeling, and did some basic testing. It was benign, it was nothing. I'm telling her this. I wouldn't worry about it. Don't let it bother you. There's nothing wrong. But she's grabbing her abdomen like this. And I said, are you okay? She says, well, my ulcerative colitis is still acting up. I've had it for 12 years. I'm on 3 drugs, including a very expensive biologic that costs thousands of dollars per month. She's a school teacher. Her husband was a Milwaukee cop, so not making a lot of money. And I'm still hemorrhaging. I'm getting blood transfusions every 2 to 3 months. So they said they want to take my colon out now. 38-year-old woman is going to have an ileostomy bag for the rest of her life. And minus the colon, you never regain health. So I said to her, you know what? I've been seeing you for palpitations, but let me tell you what I do with a lot of other people when they have coronary disease. I told her about the diet, no grains, no sugars. She says, no, I don't have celiac disease. They biopsied me twice and ran all the blood tests. I don't have celiac disease. I said, I know that. This is not about celiac disease. I said, what do you have to lose? They're going to remove your stinking colon in a few weeks, right? She says, big sigh. Okay. She does it. She comes back like a month later, big smile on her face. I said, tell me what happened. She said, within 5 days, the bleeding stopped. The diarrhea stopped. The pain went away. 2 weeks, I stopped one of the drugs. 4 weeks, I stopped the second drug. And subsequently, she stopped the third drug and lost 38 pounds. I didn't even tell her she would lose weight. And she was young, slender, and healthy. Well, before she saw me, she went back to her gastroenterologist who was advising colectomy, colon removal. And he said, what happened to you? She said, look at me. I'm healthier than I've been in 12 years. I'm slender and healthy. I don't have ulcerative colitis anymore. He says, what did you do? And she told him the diet, etc. And he says, it's a coincidence. Just go back to what you were doing. And that just pissed me off so badly. That and a few other cases like that, Brian. But rather than saying, tell me again what you did. Did I overlook something? Kind of learn something from this? Instead, just dismissing it and saying it's coincidence. And so I was so disgusted by that response from him and some other episodes that I said, got to tell people, you know? And the crazy thing is, it's not as if there was no evidence for this. There was tons of evidence. And that's what shocked me. It just had not been put together and someone hadn't connected the dots. That was the birth of Wheat Belly.
Wow. I love that story. And I've had many guests on that can echo everything that you've just said. I've had many cardiologists on. If it wasn't obvious, and if you didn't listen to the intro to this podcast that I did, that Dr. Bill Davis is a cardiologist. So my fourth cardiologist confirming all this stuff. Yes, it's not about cholesterol. It's about the small, dense LDL. And people don't even look for that. And you basically do the opposite of what the guidelines tell you, and you can reverse so many things. You can lose weight. Oh man, this is what the whole film's about. You just kind of recaps so much of this useful information that I'm trying to get out to people as well. So I'm glad you have been spreading the word for many years. So wow. So that was a good recap. What specifically is going on with wheat? I mean, we could talk about gluten, gliadin, proteins, just maybe get one level deeper into why this helps.
So in the 1960s and 70s, there was a noble effort, not an evil effort, but a noble effort to try to increase yield per acre for various grains, especially wheat, corn, and soy, a non-grain, to help feed the world's hungry. There was a lot more hunger back then than there is now too, but it was much, much worse back then. So there was a big project launched east of Mexico City, funded by the U.S. government, Mexican government, Rockefeller Foundation, and others. And it was an intensive effort to increase yield per acre. And so they put wheat and other grain, other plants through extensive genetic manipulations. And the end product was this thing called a high yield semi-dwarf wheat. So if we looked at wheat prior to this, it was a 4.5 to 5 foot tall plant. And the end result of this research was an 18-inch tall, thick stalked, large seed head. So very different looking plant, but it resisted wind. It was better at resisting pests like insects and molds, and it increased yield fourfold, sixfold, eightfold. So it was a huge success. The main developer, scientist, won the Nobel Peace Prize for it, and it essentially now is almost all wheat in the world produced. But when you change the appearance, you change the genetics, you change the components dramatically. And they did a number of things. So they changed the gliadin protein. So people recognize gluten, but gliadin is the most offensive component within gluten. They changed the structure of gliadin. And it became clear that that is why there was a 400% increase in celiac disease, for instance. It also amplified its opioid effects. So the gliadin protein. So we have to remember that grains are seeds of grasses, and humans, Homo sapiens, just not equipped to eat seeds of grasses. Ruminants are, goats and cows and horses, but we are not. And so the best we can do with some of the proteins in wheat and other grains is that break down the proteins into peptide fragments. In the case of gliadin, we break it down to 4 or 5 amino acid long peptide fragments. And these have unique properties, including crossing to the brain, binding to opioid receptors, and stimulating appetite. So wheat is, in effect, a very potent appetite stimulant. And it's part of the reason why it's very difficult for modern people to lose weight, to diet, because they're taking an appetite stimulant in the form of wheat grains. But the farmers also contributed because, we can't blame the farmers. They're just trying to eke out a living. But one of the things they did was choose strains, select strains over time that were enriched in two things, wheat germagglutinin and phytates, because those are pest resistant. But they didn't recognize that the increased content of these new strains of wheat, the wheat germagglutinin is a very potent bowel toxin. It's extremely toxic to the human gastrointestinal tract. It removes all the villi, the absorptive hairs. And the phytates are very good at binding all positively charged minerals like iron and zinc and magnesium and calcium, and you poop them out. In other words, a diet low in fat, rich in healthy whole grains causes marked mineral deficiencies, and that has a whole bunch of implications of its own. And there's a whole bunch of other effects. So a lot of it was amplified by the efforts of agribusiness and genetics research. Now, people often say then I'll go back to traditional strains of wheat. Well, I asked this question. Well, what happened to the people who first consumed wild wheat? We go back 10 to 12,000 years to the Middle East, and people then, there was a period of famine, and they turned to the seeds of grasses. And to their credit, they figured out how to make the seeds of grasses edible. It's not easy. You have to isolate the seed, uh, remove the husk, you pulverize it with a stone, you then reheat it in a stone bowl over a fire with water, and you make a porridge. That was the first way wheat was consumed. That was einkorn wheat, a 14 chromosome form. Modern wheat, by the way, is a 42 chromosome plant. In other words, there's a huge distance, genetic distance between the ancestral form of wheat and what we call wheat today. Probably shouldn't even be called wheat, to be honest. That's why I call it Franken wheat or Frankengrain.
Mm-hmm.
But what happened to those people who first turned to wild wheat, 14 chromosome that grew in the fields of the Middle East? There was an explosion in tooth decay. People are often surprised to hear prior to the consumption of grains, tooth decay was very uncommon. Only about 1 to 3% of all teeth recovered back then showed tooth decay, misalignment, evidence of infection, periodontitis, or tooth loss. With the adoption of grain, 16 to 49% of all teeth recovered showed decay, misalignment, abscess, tooth loss. There was a doubling of knee arthritis, and there was evidence for deficiencies, especially of iron, because of those phytates. There's markings in bones that show that your bone marrow is growing like crazy to compensate for the lack of iron. So even people who ate the traditional strains of ancestral wheat had a ton of health problems. So I think the bottom line here is the seeds of grasses, we're not equipped to consume the seeds of grasses. And of course, the great irony is it's the food that the government and its agencies and all hold up as the one thing you must consume every day, every meal, every snack.
It's the wildest thing ever. It's insane. That's why people get labeled conspiracy theorists, because we're like, hey, the government's completely wrong. This is insane. This makes no sense. And now all of a sudden you're a conspiracy theorist because you just understand basic human biology and you do some research. I love that. Man, I'm looking back at all this stuff a lot right now. We also got shorter, our brains got smaller, we have more evidence of disease. You can look at the bones, and post agriculture, post the 12,000 years ago, it's very different. And Dr. Bill Schindler, a friend of mine, talks about in his first years as a paleoanthropologist and archaeologist, they took the two remains side by side, and it's like one was very much, disease, shorter, smaller. It's like, this is the one after agriculture, and these are our ancestors before this. Oh man, it's bad. And yes, people, you can try to mitigate the damage done by grains, and you can ferment and you can do some different things, but still, this is just survival food that I think everyone should get rid of, whether you have celiac disease or not. I never had celiac. I got rid of, so my story was 9 years ago, got rid of grains. All I did was kind of get rid of the grains and the sugar. My allergies went away, joint pain went away, chronic overuse injuries in my arms from using the computer went away, acid reflux went away. It's just amazing. And I'm sure you see this just on a daily basis.
All the time. And of course, the majority of my mainstream colleagues continue to dispense medications for all those conditions. And we see people with 6, 7, 10, 12 medications, all to treat the consequences of wheat and grain consumption. Yeah, it's nuts.
Do you get into the vegetable oil too? Like, it sounds like we're talking about some Weston Price stuff. You're talking about all, like, he found the 1 to 3% of cavities when he studied the ancient cultures, that the people eating the native diets, they only had 1 to 3% of tooth loss or caries, and that kind of matches up with the skeletal record. And he just found that when the sugars, the grains, and the seed oils, the vegetable oils came into the population, that's when their health declined.
Yeah, so Weston Price's extraordinary experience plays out the same arguments, and of course, modern comparisons of modern people to indigenous populations, the Yanomami, the Matsas, the Maasai, the Hadza, the Malawi, the interior of New Guinea. All these people They have problems with infections and injury, of course, but they have virtually no hemorrhoids, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, allergies, coronary disease, aortic disease, migraine headaches, Parkinson's. In other words, all these diseases that, as you know, the anthropologists call the diseases of civilization. Well, I think there's an important lesson in that. What are they doing right? We've done a good job with infections and injury. We've done a really crappy job with the diseases of civilization. But I think trying to mimic the things that they do that we don't do, like eat animal products, going back to organ consumption, eating roots and tubers, and berries and fruit and nuts, going back to the way it was, not packaged, processed, microwavable, served through a window, fast food window. We go back to, as you say, whole foods and minus the grains, and all kinds of good stuff happens, and it puts your doctor out of business.
Well, yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We'll change the sick care system. It's like, what can we do? People ask what to do. I don't think we can change it from the top level. It's not like we're gonna get the U.S. government to all of a sudden say, "Oh, we were wrong about the grains." What you can do is fix your own health, cut out these foods, and just don't go to the doctor anymore. And so, yeah, I asked. So, seed oil specifically, though. I mean, I'm guessing you're just into the same thing. Let's use the natural fat, not the seed oils.
Absolutely. If you buy some pork, eat the fat. Buy fatty cuts of meat. Never buy lean cuts. Eat all the eggs you want. Use lots of olive oil. Use lard. Use tallow. Use coconut. Yeah, the whole argument for reducing saturated fat is the evidence is so bad, it's shameful that the American Heart Association just recently reiterated their stand. And they actually said this based on the studies performed in the 1950s. And of course, that was a time when they didn't know how to design clinical trials. They're garbage. They're complete, absolute garbage. Yet that's the evidence they use, plus the more modern epidemiologic data. Epidemiologic observational data is little better than no data at all. And if you look at all those studies, particularly from the Harvard School of Public Health, you'll see they misinterpreted tons of their own data. One of my favorite examples is they took a bunch of nurses' health study, 47,000 ladies, and they just asked them, how much whole grains do you eat and how much white flour you eat? One, questionnaires are deeply flawed. If I said, Brian, what'd you eat for breakfast Monday? Oh, gee, what did I eat? I mean, that's the basis of their evidence. But they did follow these ladies, something like 12 years. They said ladies who ate white flour products, more white flour, gained, I think, 12.5 pounds, something like that. Ladies who ate more whole grains gained 11.7 pounds. Conclusion: eating whole grains controls weight. That's not how you interpret that.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love debunking the epidemiology. It's so bad. It's so bad. I love Nina Teicholz, who's part of the film and came on the show. It's like, how many cups of ribs have you had in the last year? I mean, it's just like the wildest questions and no one knows. And they also just try to make it sound, everyone wants to sound healthier. So they just kind of parrot the same health advice they're told. They're like, oh no, I don't eat much red meat. I'm eating all the whole grains and fruits. And there's also, I mean, they add up the calories that these people say they report, and it's like 1,200 calories a day. I'm like, well, you're gaining weight. Why you claim to only eat 1,200 calories? It's the least scientific of all science we have, I think. So let's move on to the gut health, because that's what your new book's about. And I think a lot of the disease just is from the gut, right? Maybe you can tell us more.
Yeah, how this got started, Brian, was so part of the basic program before super gut type strategies did include a high potency multi species probiotic, inclusion of fermented foods, and prebiotic fibers and other nutrients that nourish microbes. So we were doing that. And yet it was clear that it was not enough. There were residual problems for some people. They say things like, yeah, I lost 73 pounds. I'm no longer a type 2 diabetic, but I'm still intolerant to multiple kinds of foods. I can't eat nightshades. I can't eat FODMAPs. I can't eat anything with fructose in it, or I get explosive diarrhea and cramps. Or somebody has maybe 70% reduction in joint pain from rheumatoid arthritis, and they're off the biologic, but they're still on prednisone and a nonsteroidal drug. So in other words, people were experiencing huge improvements with the basic efforts, but not always 100%. So what the hell's going on? So I started looking at the microbiome more deeply. It became clear that's where the answers were. Two phenomena that it helps your listeners to know. One, we've lost numerous healthy species because a lot of the beneficial species especially in the gut microbiome, are very susceptible to common antibiotics like amoxicillin or penicillin or clarithromycin. Very susceptible. So you take a course of amoxicillin for an upper respiratory tract infection or a urinary tract infection, you wipe out dozens to hundreds of healthy species. Now, when you do that, when you lose healthy species, they were competing with the unhealthy species, mostly fecal or stool microbes. So there's been a proliferation in most modern people of these unhealthy species. And to my shock, because I thought this previously was rare, in my estimation, one of two Americans, 160 million people, those fecal microbes, E. coli, Klebsiella, Citrobacter, Pseudomonas, Proteus, etc., have proliferated and then ascended up from the 4 to 5 feet of colon into the 24 feet of small bowel. Now, I didn't appreciate how common this was until this device came out. The air device. It's a device you blow into, and it registers hydrogen gas on the breath because bacteria produce hydrogen gas, but we cannot. So when it first came out in 2018, it was billed by the inventor, Dr. Angus Short, as a device to navigate a low FODMAPs diet in people with irritable bowel syndrome, because there's evidence from Australia that people who reduce fibers and sugars, so-called FODMAPs, have less bloating and diarrhea when they do that. And that's true. Well, so that comes out, this device comes out for that purpose. I called up the inventor. I said, Angus, that's not what this is. So I'm telling the inventor what he invented. I said, it's really a mapping device. It tells you where, if you use timing, it tells you where microbes are living in the GI tract. Because if I take something that causes microbes to produce hydrogen gas, it should take a minimum of 90 minutes, sometimes many hours, to reach the colon where they're supposed to produce hydrogen gas. What if I consume something that microbes can convert to hydrogen gas, but I register hydrogen gas within 30 minutes of consuming? Well, couldn't have got to the colon. So it's in the stomach, duodenum, jejunum. So now Angus Short knows that. They're changing the instructions, et cetera, because he has some regulatory constraints on what he can say. So the full instructions on how to use the device are in my Super Gut book. And I show you how to use it as a mapping device. But when I started advocating this and thousands of people did it, what shocked me, Brian, was it's the exceptional person who tests negative. And then we embarked on programs to eradicate this problem, the so-called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And it would, one, normalize the H2 gas level. It's a 0 to 10 scale. And let's say they were at 9.8. Now it's down to 1.2 or something like that. And they would say, and finally, I can go back to eating the nightshades. I can eat nuts again. I don't have to stay on a low histamine diet. I don't have to avoid FODMAPs. My rheumatoid arthritis is gone. My hemoglobin A1C finally dropped to the ideal range, below 5.0%. I'm finally off all the blood pressure medication. My persistent rash finally went away. And so the correction of the H2 producing SIBO also appears to be associated with improvement in whatever persistent issue was there.
That's super interesting because it seems to all start in the gut, even the blood sugar problems. You're talking about resolving blood sugar problems just by changing the gut, healing the gut, getting rid of the SIBO. It's pretty amazing because I don't think we've had this paradigm until recently that not many people realize how much that just the gut health affects everything.
So Dr. Patrice Kenny in 2007 in France, now in Belgium, finally validated this whole concept that so when you have 30 feet of microbes living and dying, they don't live for a few hours. They don't live for decades, live for a few hours. So it means trillions of microbes turning over rapidly in 30 feet of GI tract. Well, the colon, where microbes are supposed to be, has a thick 2-layer mucus barrier. Small bowel has a much more fragile single-layer mucus barrier. When you have these stool or fecal microbes populating the small bowel, it inflames the intestinal wall, and it increases intestinal permeability. And the breakdown products of bacteria, especially something called endotoxin, enters the bloodstream. So you can actually measure higher levels of endotoxin when this SIBO process develops. But this is how the gut microbiome can be experienced as depression in the brain, or Alzheimer's dementia, or Parkinson's disease, or as the joint pain of fibromyalgia or rheumatoid arthritis, or as a skin rash like psoriasis or rosacea. In other words, or raising blood sugar and insulin resistance, or weight gain. So the microbiome is a major player in all those conditions. It's a major player, I think, in virtually all human conditions. So it means if your doctor gives you a non-steroidal agent for arthritis, or a relaxing agent for fibromyalgia, or an injectable drug for migraine headaches, they haven't addressed the root cause, the overproliferated bacteria and the endotoxemia that exports those gut effects to other parts of the body.
That's so important. And people, okay. The LP, okay, sorry. I was thinking of the LPS. Maybe you could go into that real quick and just endotoxins in general, and then I'll go to the next one.
So a lot of the fecal microbial species, like E. coli and Klebsiella, are so-called gram-negative species. They don't take up the gram stain, so they're called gram-negatives. But it tells you something about the composition of the cell wall, and that endotoxin is, as you point out, is LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. There are others, like there's something called lipoteichoic acid that comes from the gram-positive microbes like Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and Enterococcus. But the big player in endotoxemia, that is the thing that causes your gut microbiome to export effects to other parts of the body, the big player is that LPS endotoxin. There's been studies lately. I'm always surprised that some groups do this. I wouldn't do it, but like a German group, for instance, it's always been known that, when somebody's depressed, I mean, really depressed, a lot of them don't respond to conventional antidepressants like SSRIs. So the question has been asked, what makes those people different from the people who do respond to SSRIs? Well, it's clear that people who don't respond have higher inflammatory states, higher C-reactive protein, IL-1 beta, IL-6, TNF alpha, other markers. So a German group said, could this be due to endotoxemia? So they took normal, non-depressed people and injected them with the LPS endotoxin, which you likely know is extremely toxic. If you miscalculate by a little bit, you kill the person. So I'm shocked they got this through their review board, but they did it twice.
Mm-hmm.
And they injected it into non-depressed people who promptly became very depressed, and they performed MRI, functional MRI of the brain, and it showed all the hallmarks of depression. In other words, endotoxemia is a major player in at least some depression. But it illustrates microbes have effects all throughout the body. Now, the solution is not a drug to block inflammation. That's what the pharmaceutical companies did. They're trying to persuade psychiatrists to add an anti-inflammatory biologic to the SSRIs. And by the way, those anti-inflammatory biologics typically cost anywhere from $4,000 to $12,000 a month. So they do it for financial reasons, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh, why not get at the root cause, the source of the inflammation, and not just block a pathway in inflammation? And the other side of this is because if you don't address the overpopulated microbes in the GI tract, you leave yourself open to other problems: weight gain, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune diseases, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, colon cancer, diverticular disease, on and on and on. So not addressing that, to me, is malpractice, but it's done, Brian, every day.
Well, regular mainstream doctors don't know about this. I guess they're just not trained in this, is what I gather. That we have this whole system set up where they just do procedures and prescriptions, and very few doctors get trained in this. Some of them that I've had on, Dr. Georgia Eade, Dr. Chris Palmer, and Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride. These are three people that really get into the mental health aspects and the diet and the gut-brain connection. And so if people want to dig deeper on this stuff, you can go find those episodes that I've done with those three doctors. And You know, it's interesting though that I alluded to this before we started recording. We started talking about carnivore doctors. These three doctors are kind of keto carnivore type of approaches to resolve tons of problems and change the gut and fix the, well, I don't know if it's fix the gut microbiome, but resolve a lot of the problems. But I know from reading your book and talking to you that maybe you're just avoiding the symptoms. You're not really addressing the root cause by just avoiding, just being carnivore for the rest of your life, just because you have food intolerances. Or like you said, if you have problems with FODMAPs or histamines or certain foods, yes, you can do okay just by avoiding those foods. But I guess you're kind of saying the ultimate goal is to include all those foods and not have to just avoid all FODMAPs, right?
Yeah, whenever you do something like a low FODMAPs diet or a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet or a strict low carb diet, you're essentially starving microbes, good and bad. So the starvation of the bad microbes that are causing, for instance, intolerance to histamine containing foods, that's a good thing. But you're also starving the good guys. You drop populations of, for instance, Fecalibacterium, lactobacilli, and bifidobacteria. But there's some odd things that occur. You know, one of the most consistent markers of a healthy gut microbiome is diversity, the number of species you have. When you cut out all those plant matter, keto, carnivorous, whatever, there's a marked reduction in diversity. You kill off good and bad species. And then some other peculiar things happen. There's a species called Akkermansia muciniphila. Akkermansia mucus lover. Well, Akkermansia loves plant matter and it thrives and it'll come to populate about 3 to 5% of all microbes in in the normal healthy GI tract. When you starve it, many microbes die off or are reduced in numbers because they don't have anything to eat. Akkermansia can compensate by consuming human mucus, muciniphila, and it can expand to 15, 18, 24% or more of the entire microbiome. When that happens and it's consuming your mucus barrier, well, that allows microbes to contact the intestinal wall, and that's very destructive, very inflammatory. And it opens up intestinal permeability. So there's an increase in endotoxemia. And this leads to all kinds of problems when you have an increase in endotoxemia. So it's a typical course. Somebody goes keto, carnivorous, whatever. Weight loss, triglycerides come down, LDL cholesterol comes down, blood pressure drops. They're feeling great. They lost a bunch of weight. And then 18 months or so into it, they say, I'm getting constipated now. And my triglycerides are going back up. My blood sugar and blood pressure going back up. I'm having a lot of abdominal discomfort. They're experiencing the dysbiosis, the disruption of their microbiome, including overproliferation of Akkermansia and some other species. And so, in other words, that is not a natural human diet to eat that way. And so, unfortunately, some of that damage may be irreversible because you can't, just like you can't make rats out of rags, right? You can't come up with new species that you've lost. So it's a problem. So the key here is to continue to include plant matter like root vegetables, legumes, white beans, black beans, chickpeas, hummus, peas, nuts, some fruit, because these things nourish microbes. And I tell you, Brian, 10 years ago, if you would have told me it's microbes that are the commanding factor in human health, I would have thought you're nuts. But it's become clear that's true.
I completely agree. Everyone's kind of waking up to this, but see the carnivore people. See, I kind of am in confusing people because I go back and forth between different guests and their different ideas. And I had a carnivore doctor on that he's like, "Hey, I've been doing this off and on for 20 years, 5 years strict. The last 5 years strict carnivore. He's doing amazing. He's like, I do not want to go back. He's just convinced this is the best way that he can live. So what do you like? And I didn't know tons of different people because I just happened to be in this sort of meat community. So I just know a lot of carnivores. I'm not carnivore. I always include fermented vegetables. I always include like some root vegetables, some fruit, all that type of stuff you're talking about. But I just am always trying to show both sides to people on my podcast. I want to hear both sides and hear the arguments. So yeah, what do you think's going on with these people, or do you think they're set up for failure later? Or
You know, we can only speculate because no one has done that study where you take a bunch of people. And because if I took somebody and said, you are going to be on a carnivorous diet, you are not. You're going to be on some alternative diet. And then we follow you for 10 years and see if you get more colon cancer or other disease. It's extremely difficult to do. It's
yeah.
impractical to get people to stick to a single lifestyle. So we can only get indirect information. And so the information, like with acromantia or the loss of species diversity, or another effect that develops with carnivory, strict carnivory, is an increase in species like Bilophila and Desulfovibrio. And these are species that make something called secondary bile acids, which are potent colon cancer causes. So this is fact. This is not my speculation. There's a marked increase in those species in the colon, and you get increase in these secondary bile acids, and they are potent causes of cancer. So, but it's hard to prove because we'd have to watch thousands of people over an extended period, randomized to a diet. And would you really want to participate in something where we say we want to know if this lifestyle causes colon cancer? And how would you prove that it causes colon cancer? So it's a very, very difficult thing to show prevention of something. And so in this instance, we'll never know for sure. It's a similar question. Does sodium nitrite cause colon cancer? Well, the experimental evidence suggests it really does. Sodium nitrite is a very potent carcinogen. But sodium nitrite consumed directly is not. It requires heating in the presence of proteins, as you would in cooking meat. And the so-called nitroso compounds or nitrosamines appear to have carcinogenic effects in experimental animals, experimental settings. Well, what if I said, Brian, I want you to be part of my clinical trial. We're going to feed you something that contains sodium nitrite, a meat containing sodium nitrite, or a meat not containing sodium nitrite, and you eat this every day, and we're going to do annual colonoscopies to see if you have colon cancer. Impractical, unethical, won't be done. So we have to go on the incomplete evidence. So a lot of preventive information, unfortunately, is very incomplete.
But then, yeah, but earlier you were saying meat does not cause cancer. So you're just saying it's more the context, or what are you saying?
So it's not meat per se that does it. It's the lack of the plant matter, the polysaccharides, the prebiotic fibers, and other factors. So it's just like vegetarians. Vegetarians eat a lot of good things, but it's not the vegetables that are responsible for all the effects. That's a poor example. But so it's not that meat is bad per se. It's what they're lacking that is the problem.
Mm-hmm. And it's, yeah. And then I think the problem with all it's like, what else are they eating too? If you're looking at the studies of just the standard Americans, they're eating the meat with the processed food.
True. Very true. Now, let me tell you about one of the things I've been doing. So if someone has SIBO, maybe they test with the AIR device, or maybe they have what I call the telltale signs, like food intolerances. If you have a food intolerance, it's virtually guaranteed you have SIBO as a cause for the food intolerance. And removing the food is not a solution. It can help reduce symptoms. It does not get rid of the cause, the SIBO. Or you have fat malabsorption. You're seeing fat droplets in the toilet. Or you have a condition virtually synonymous with SIBO. That would include fibromyalgia, restless leg syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, a lot of neurodegenerative disorders, autoimmune diseases. If you're obese, 50% chance you have SIBO. If you have fatty liver, which, by the way, is about 160 million Americans, 50% chance you have SIBO. By the way, when you start to tally up all these populations, what proportion of people with fatty liver have SIBO? What proportion of people with irritable bowel syndrome have SIBO? If you add up what the evidence tells us, we easily exceed 100 million people. I think we easily exceed over 150 million people. So it's not an uncommon thing. To my shock, it is very, very common. But the conventional solution to SIBO, if your doctor even knows what it is, which is often not the case, they say, Brian, did you consult Dr. Google again? Right? Or there's nothing wrong with you. Or we did an endoscopy, colonoscopy. There's nothing wrong. You can't see it with a scope. The most they might do is write a prescription for rifaximin or xifaxin, which is not very effective, about 50% efficacy. It's very expensive, and they don't tell you how to improve the efficacy. They don't tell you how to prevent recurrences, which are common. And so I, I asked a series of questions. What if you took a probiotic, commercial probiotic for SIBO? Will it go away? No, because commercial probiotics, the vast majority of them make no sense. They're just haphazard collections of microbes. So if you take one, you might reduce bloating and diarrhea a little bit, but that's it. Still have SIBO. So I asked these questions. What if we chose microbes that are known to colonize the upper GI tract where SIBO occurs? And what if we chose microbes that are known to produce what are called bacteriocins? These are natural antibiotics effective against fecal microbes. So I chose three. A strain of Lactobacillus gasseri colonizes upper GI tract, produces up to 7 bacteriocins. Lactobacillus rhodori, my favorite microbe in the world, colonizes the upper GI tract, produces up to 4 bacteriocins, and a strain of Bacillus coagulans. I fermented them as, I call it yogurt. It's not really yogurt. We use extended fermentation so that we get really high bacterial counts. When we perform flow cytometry in the yogurts, we get like 250 to 300 billion counts per half cup serving. We consume this for 4 weeks. And so far, Brian, 35 people, 90% have normalized their breath hydrogen gas. Now, that's anecdotal. We have many clinical trials going on and more to come. I've added that to my list of clinical trials to perform. Dr. Angus Short with the AIR device will likely collaborate with us. And we can't do it as yogurt, though. It has to be encapsulated as a probiotic. We want to show that this very purposeful collection of microbes that colonize the upper GI tract and produce bacteriocins may be a very easy way to get rid of SIBO. You know, if I said to you, Brian, the solution for SIBO is to remove your colon, well, we better be damn confident that's true, right?
Yeah.
But what if the solution is a yogurt that tastes good with blueberries and chia seeds? Well, then the proof is not so. We will do the clinical trial, but I think the solution is potentially so benign, so familiar that I think. And by the way, at least the 2 species, the gasseri and the rhodori, are what I call, or whatever we call, keystone species. They're extremely important for other microbes too. And so I almost regret calling it, I call it SIBO yogurt, but it's probably something that you should consume or we should consume chronically. It doesn't have to be yogurt. It could be other fermented foods also, but the yogurt's just very easy.
Well, I'm a big fan of yogurts and raw yogurt and making yogurts. I just had some this weekend made from raw yogurt. And yeah, you talked a lot about in the book. I'm all in. I just got to get a hold of some of this stuff. I know you write about the recipe and how to do it in the book, right?
So I tell people, choose the microbe for the effect you want, like going to a restaurant. If you walk into a restaurant and the waitress hands you a menu, you don't freak out and say, listen, I can't order all these appetizers and main dishes and desserts. You pick and choose the dishes you want. So you can pick and choose the microbe you want for the effect you want. If you want a reduction in arthritis pain, let's ferment the Bacillus coagulans. If you want to shrink your waist and reduce inflammatory phenomena, let's make yogurt with Lactobacillus gasseri. If you want smoother skin, reduce skin wrinkles, deeper sleep with extended REM, restoration of youthful muscle and strength, preservation of bone density, increased libido, let's ferment Lactobacillus rhodori. In other words, you can pick and choose the microbe you want. If you want a healthier baby, let's ferment Bifidobacterium infantis. Because if the baby doesn't have Bifidobacterium infantis, because mom couldn't give it to her, the baby, because she got antibiotics, doesn't pass on to the baby can't grow properly, doesn't have normal neurological development because it needs that microbe to consume some of the nutrients in breast milk. And so get that baby some Bifidobacterium infantis, and the baby has a higher IQ later in life, has fewer bowel movements as a baby, fewer diaper changes from mom and dad, more likely to sleep through the night, and as an older child, less likely to have asthma, autoimmune diseases, type 1 diabetes, and does better in school. I mean, that's how lifelong implications for that one microbe. So these are the microbes that we've lost, and there's more, but these are the microbes we've lost because of our exposure to antibiotics and other factors.
Well, it sounds like people do want all those though. You kind of want all those good effects, and people would probably choose all those. But I guess you can do that as well.
You can do polymicrobial fermentation. The downside to that is that, so when we do one microbe at a time, like Lactobacillus reuteri, that's the most popular because the ladies go nuts because they lose their skin wrinkles starting within about 8 weeks or so. There's an increase in dermal collagen. Guys like it because there's a marked increase in strength and muscle mass, but it also increases libido and improves your immune response. I'm a chronic insomniac, Brian. For decades, I've struggled to sleep. I now sleep straight through, rare interruptions, 8, 9 hours, vivid dreams, which is completely crazy because I'm an insomniac. It increases testosterone back to youthful levels. It increases vaginal moisture. In other words, when you think about this, with reuteri alone, muscle and strength, smoother skin, increased libido, vaginal moisture, increased testosterone. I don't think it's a stretch to say just this one microbe turns the clock back 20 years. I think that's what we're seeing. Now, that's just one microbe. There are many others that we can play with, but sometimes we just monoculture it to get bigger effects from larger. One thing has become clear over time. The world of probiotics and microbes, there's very little what's called dose response evidence. If 10 billion have a benefit, is 50 billion even better? Is 100 billion even better? Well, when you buy a probiotic, it's very expensive to produce these high counts, but you can do it yourself just by using yogurt or other things. You can ferment hummus or salsa or fruit purees or all kinds of things, vegetables. You may not get the same counts, but you're still getting lots and lots of microbes of a specific kind if you want those specific microbes.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm gonna start now because I mean I just got into your book the past few days, so I'm I'm not I've not made this yet, but I've heard amazing anecdotes through the book, and I'm just always been about fermented foods. And I wanted to go back to something you said because we're talking about carnivore and like kind of these restrictive diets that do so many people I know so well, right? They've had great improvements, but you're saying that doesn't solve the problem. You're not actually solving the root problem. You're kind of just avoiding the problem. And what you want to do is regrow some of these species and heal the gut. And you need to repopulate these bacteria to do that.
Yeah, if we follow the logic through. So if you disrupted your intestinal microbiome because you took amoxicillin 7 times or took azithromycin a few times, or you're exposed to glyphosate, the herbicide in Roundup that's also an antibiotic, or other herbicides and pesticides, or food additives like preservatives, which are antibacterial in food, but also in your GI tract, or emulsifying agents like polysorbate 80 or carboxymethylcellulose or carrageenan that disrupts your mucus barrier and gives you the microbiome of an obese type 2 diabetic, and on and on and on. So if you've mucked up your microbiome and you decide to starve those microbes, the fecal microbes, that doesn't return the situation back to normal. You've reduced the fecal microbe population, but you also reduced all the healthy populations. And then you have kind of odd things that happen, like that overproliferation of Akkermansia. So I think we just have to think this through better before we have a flood of diverticular disease, colon cancer, and other diseases because of the failed diets.
Mm. Well, I've seen this firsthand in people where they have added foods back in and then they can tolerate them. So that's like kind of what you said before. Even with oxalates, even you talked about a different species. What's it called? Oxalobact.
Oxalobacter formigenes.
Yeah, and that you should be able to handle some of these oxalates. People, because I don't want to get caught in my own like what I tell people not to do. I tell people not to just like get into a camp, have a bias, just be like, oh, kale and spinach have oxalates, and I'm just going to avoid spinach and kale forever, which is kind of what I've been doing. But now I'm thinking more about it. It's like, oh wait, it's not like these things are poison. I mean, I don't want to do what I did before, which was eat them every day in a raw kale and spinach smoothie. I did that years ago, And I don't think that's good. And that's not evolutionary consistent, right? We didn't have access to these. It's kind of overloading your system if you do that every single day. But humans should be able to digest some of the oxalate. And that bacteria you mentioned does eat the oxalate.
You're right. So the understanding of the microbiome is causing us to reconsider all these metabolic issues like oxalates or uric acid or the apparent need for such things as B12 or B1, B2, B3, B5, B6, B7, B9, and K2. So, in other words, these are all microbe issues. And even to some degree, heavy metals, especially cadmium, mercury, and lead, are cleared. You can clear them if you have the right microbes. And so, pregnant moms are told to take folic acid. Well, folate is a product of microbes. So, wouldn't it be smarter to repopulate with the missing microbes that produce folate rather than put it in grains? So, we're having to reconsider so many issues as we see this issue with TMAO, trimethylamino oxide, that's being billed by the Cleveland Clinic in Stan Hazen's lab, is a cause for cardiovascular disease. The mistake they make, I believe, is they say, if you eat fish, they say this, if you eat fish, it gives you heart disease, which is contrary to everything else we think about, right? Well, what they failed to do is they viewed the microbiome as a black box and essentially said everybody's the same. And out the other end comes TMAO, trimethylamino oxide. Well, I think they failed to recognize that it's the fecal microbes, especially proteobacteria and some of the Bacteroidetes, that are the producers of TMAO. That's what they're looking at. It's not the problem is not the fish or the pork. The problem is the microbiome. But they misinterpreted because they looked only at the end product.
So this is an interesting one because this has come up a lot over the years. Some people may know as TMAO, which a lot of these vegan people try to say, oh, meat is bad because of TMAO. And then, like you said, we're like, wait, but fish has TMAO, and we all agree that fish is healthy. So it's just another one of those things where they're getting myopic. I think a lot of the researchers, they get really myopic, and they're like, oh, well, like this little thing, this TMAO, or they're like, well, mTOR, like meat has, produces more mTOR, so it's bad. I'm like, well, so does eating a whole bunch of sugar and grains. You know what I mean? You get these high spikes of mTOR from eating all kinds of foods, and you guys are trying to blame it on meat. So yeah, it really all goes back to the gut bacteria. Man, I want to talk about the Hadza because you're into this kind of ancestral approach, and we're talking about basically our modern environment is screwing up our gut bacteria so much, and that all these problems are basically because we have disrupted. We don't have all the species. I actually spent time with the Hadza last year. I was with the Hadza and the Maasai. I went to Tanzania and then also went to the Pygmies in Uganda, and we were, doing what we can, investigating how they eat and lived. And yes, super healthy. Some of these people were over 100, jumping around, dancing, super interesting. What I saw, so I think that they're getting their microbes and their gut bacteria and their great microbiome from the environment and from just like they're not washing things. They're not using Purell. I don't think they're getting all the fiber that we think we're getting. So I just want to have a discussion about this. I saw them, I ate tubers with them. They cooked these tubers. I mean, they're covered in dirt. They cook them and then they gnaw on them and they spit out all the fiber. You can't eat this. These tubers are so fibrous. You can't eat the fiber. You're really just getting glucose juice just to get some calories. And this is what the women did while the men went hunting. So I guess I'm saying, maybe you could tell me what you think. I don't think the research on the Hadza is right. They supposedly get 100 grams of fiber per day. I don't think that's true. I think if these people come with a bias, I've talked to these guys like Herman Ponzer. He's this Harvard guy that's just obsessed with the food pyramid. He's like obsessed with whole grains and fruits and vegetables and low meat. I talked to this guy on the phone. It was a bad conversation. We did not do a podcast. Another guy too. Oh man, he was another one of these Harvard guys that just seemed to just be all about the fiber and this standard American food pyramid thing. And I just think that their microbiome is so good. They're doing so many other good things. They're getting their vitamin D. They're getting their exercise. They're out. They're not washing their knives. They're eating the microbes that are on everything. They opened up a small antelope, a tic-tic, for me when we got there, cut it open, sliced that up, cut the guts out, sliced open the liver. The knife was covered, well, for one, in just dirt and muck and whatever. It was also covered in the guts. It had yellow and green stuff on the knife, cut the liver and gave me a piece of liver, and I just ate it raw. I never felt better. I mean, I was there for a couple weeks, more than a couple weeks, felt amazing. I think I improved my gut microbiome by leaps and bounds by doing that. So I do think it's good to eat a variety of foods and include, some, like roots and tubers and other plant life. And I like herbs and fermented vegetables. But I don't know. I kind of just went on a rant there. What do you think?
Well, I think that's terrific. You know, they're also not exposed to antibiotics
Yeah.
and glyphosate and food preservatives and synthetic sweeteners like aspartame or stomach acid blocking drugs or anti-inflammatory drugs. I mean, we're exposed to this. It's almost like we've conspired to destroy the human
Yeah.
microbiome. And they, of course, have none of that stuff. And they eat things raw. They eat a lot of components of the GI tract raw. And of course, those are filled with high density of microbes. And I was talking to Paul Zak. He calls himself a neuroeconomist,
Mm.
but we both have an interest in the hormone oxytocin. And he went into the interior of New Guinea. And he says the first thing that strikes you, I wanted his data on oxytocin. He drew their blood levels of oxytocin. And he said the first thing that strikes you is the stink.
Mm.
He says of unwashed human bodies, there's no running water, of course, but there's a nearby stream. And he said it took 4 alcohol swabs just to get through the dirt and grease on their arms that draw their blood. But the reason why I wanted his oxytocin data was because here's something. So one of the reasons why rotari, Lactobacillus rotari, this microbe we've virtually all lost, all modern humans have lost. The Hadza still have it. The New Guineans still have it. The Yanomami have it. Other mammals have it. We've lost it. When you restore it, it causes the brain to release more oxytocin, the hormone of love and empathy. And so there's a surge in affection for your partner, for coworkers, for other people. There's a feeling of generosity. There's a tolerance for other people's opinion. And then you get all those other physical effects: smoother skin, muscle, bone, increased libido, testosterone, etc. But that alone, Brian, the restoration of generosity and tolerance is, to me, that's one of the big reasons I do this. It's because I think we really screwed things up badly. But here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if that's true, was the intensity of love and affection 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, more intense than it is today? Tough to prove. That's why I wanted to see if I could get the oxytocin levels. I got the oxytocin levels of Paul Zak's population in New Guinea. I have one from Central Africa and one from South America. Unfortunately, the oxytocin method of measurement, the assay, is so wildly variable. It makes the levels, you can't compare them. So I can't prove that people unexposed to modern factors have higher oxytocin. I'd like to prove that, though, in some fashion. But I see it playing out, though, as we restore oxytocin by way of rotari, like making out rotari yogurt. I'm seeing all these things play out, that people cry more at movies. They're more emotional. Their relationships are more intense. It's very interesting stuff.
I think there's definitely something to that. I think our world is devolving into just a more angry, split up world, and people are against each other, and that's for many reasons. And I think the media and there's a lot of powers that kind of push that more of a divisive issues and splitting people into two opposing factions and stuff. But I think that's happening with all of our modern environment, and I think I see the opposite in my community, especially here in Austin. It is the most positive, supportive community. It's a whole different kind of person. I think you should come check the oxytocin levels in my crew over here in Austin. It is amazing. Like, there is just hundreds of people that are loving and caring and supportive of each other. And it's a whole new world. And I see people online too. I communicate with so many people, unless they're vegan. I think the vegans have the low oxytocin. They have some the disrupted gut, disrupted everything. But everyone else is so just compassionate. Yeah, I think there's something to this.
So I think what the world would be like if we restored this lost microbe, Lactobacillus rhodori, and other microbes, because they also play a role in SIBO, and reversed SIBO. And even better, remove all wheat and grains from the human diet. I think we'd have a dramatic transformation of the health landscape for humans. And we'd have a lot of doctors out of work. We'd have a lot of hospitals closing for lack of need. We had the pharmaceutical executives being fired, laid off, and sobbing. But this shouldn't be about profit. It should be about health.
Yeah, well, it sounds it'd be like a utopia. I think a lot of people I know are trying to go and just kind of create our own society. Not like we're actually going to live in some other, place, although some people might. But I think that is happening, where there is just like a group of people that are kind of doing all that and just going outside the system. But okay, so let's keep going. You mentioned things that the Hadza don't have. So I want to get into those things to avoid because you kind of listen very quickly, but I want to dive in more. Aspartame, the fake sugars. Why don't you just go through some of those things that glyphosate, definitely a big one, that disrupt our bacteria, our gut bacteria.
Yeah, it's a frightening list. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that we don't know about because they've never been tested. EMF, perhaps.
Mm.
The vast majority of prescription drugs have never been tested for their microbiome implications because it's not a requirement of the FDA. But chlorinated drinking water, chlorinated fluoridated drinking water uh, disrupts the mucus barrier. The mucus barrier, the mucus like they have in your airway and in your nose and all that, it also lines the entire length of the GI tract. But I liken the mucus barrier to a sink full of dirty dishes, greasy, dirty dishes, and there's an film of oil on top. You add a couple of drops of dishwashing liquid, you see the oil disperse immediately. That's what emulsifying agents do. So chlorinated drinking water does that. Polysorbate 80, carboxymethylcellulose, carrageenan, probably other emulsifying agents also that they haven't been studied, so we don't really know for a fact. But these are ubiquitous components of ice cream, salad dressings, and other food because they keep them mixed.
Yep.
Like ice cream, you let it melt or thaw too much, you refreeze it, it turns into a ball of ice, but not if you add a whole bunch of emulsifying agents. So they add it not to be evil, but to give you a better experience, but it screws up your microbiome. A lot of other drugs, stomach acid blocking drugs that reduce stomach acid. And so the oral microbiome is second only to the colon in the density of microbes. So we're swallowing all the time. Well, those oral microbes are populating the esophagus, stomach, duodenum, and downwards. Well, if you lack stomach acid, all of a sudden you have free entry of oral microbes, and it changes the composition of the microbes in the upper GI tract. That's also true, by the way, in autoimmune gastritis, in people who consume grains. They're more prone to autoimmune gastritis that wipes out the parietal cells that produce stomach acid. That can happen also. There are preservatives like potassium sorbate and sodium benzoate. They kill off microbes in food to keep it from being contaminated, but they also can kill off microbes in us when we consume those preservatives, food with preservatives in them. So, in other words, there's so many things. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs dramatically disrupt the human microbiome. It's statin drugs disrupt the human microbiome. And that's a partial list. There's many other things. So it becomes overwhelming, except to do exactly what you suggested in the beginning. Go back to real whole foods that don't have preservatives, don't have antibiotic residues, don't have as much as we can avoid glyphosate. Glyphosate's ubiquitous. It's in all of us. It's in the soil, water, air. So as much as you can, I had a neighbor who's got like a 2 or 3 acre property, only like maybe 1,000 feet away. They wanted new grass. So they killed off their entire lawn with a ton of glyphosate. And I cringe to think what that's done to the environment and to the us living in the vicinity. So, so unwise. But
That's
uh,
Well, you said it's overwhelming. Sorry. You said it's overwhelming. I think not to people listening. I think most people listening, this is just how they like to live now. It's like they don't want ingredient lists on their foods, and they don't use artificial sweeteners, and they don't, yeah, they don't, or they use the good filters and buy like good water and all these things. I think, I mean, unless they're not doing that, and they're hopefully waking up now after we're talking about all this stuff, because it's such a big difference. Blaming the, I think another problem is blaming problems on the wrong thing, and that's happened so much in the world. It's like what happens with meat. It's like you're eating all the processed foods and then you blame it on meat. Even with ice cream, I think ice cream can be a healthy treat if you make it yourself, and then you're not using the carrageenan and the emulsifiers. And it's like, so many things get a bad name because they're just mass produced and made the wrong way. Talking about bread, just like, well, bread should always probably be avoided, but there's so many things that they just make them poorly. They cut corners, and that's the real problem. It's not the ice cream itself per se.
absolutely. In the way of sweeteners, the Israeli data showed that sucralose, saccharin, and aspartame derivatives also, like neosulfame, and acesulfame, are the culprits that also change the microbiome. That was a pretty good study. It's still odd to me that three unrelated compounds, they just share the property of providing sweetness, but they're unrelated compounds. Why they would all have such deleterious effects on the microbiome. So that puzzle has not been figured out. But the natural sweeteners like stevia, monk fruit, allulose seem to be fairly benign, and allulose even may have some beneficial effects. It's maybe a weak prebiotic fiber, but it's a return to things that make more sense as opposed to things that big food added in the name of cost or palatability. But you're right. Going back to simple foods with shorter ingredient lists, that's how you deal with this.
That's the name of the game. I've been saying it in like 10 different ways, like every week. It's just, you just got to sink in and let people just go on their journey, because it's not easy, I guess, all at once to just make all these changes, but go on their journey. So help people along their journey of healing the gut. In the book, you kind of give people some solutions. You kind of lay out a dietary framework and some suggestions, and even some herbal remedies and stuff, which is interesting. I haven't gotten that into that stuff. Maybe you can go over some of that stuff.
So the diet I advocate obviously is one that has no wheat or grains or sugars, and it's a return, as we talked about, to real whole foods. We reject this notion of limiting fat. That's ridiculous. There's no need to, or limiting meat or other animal products. Eat all you want, but you should include things that nourish microbes. That is important. And then we also address nutrient deficiencies that are common to modern people, not because of the diet, but because of our lifestyles, because we're not like the Hadza. We're not outdoors wearing little clothes, so we don't get
Mhm.
much vitamin D, especially in northern climates. And we lose the capacity to activate vitamin D in the skin with sun exposure as we get older. So vitamin D is in there, magnesium, because we drink filtered drinking water, iodine, because we don't eat thyroid glands, omega-3 fatty acids, because we don't eat brains anymore. And by the way, brains also, as we said, rich sources of hyaluronic acid, collagen, and phosphatidylserine. And so, but we also add back basic nutrients because they all contribute to a reversal of insulin resistance and inflammation, the processes that afflict virtually all modern people now. The majority of modern people have insulin resistance, for instance. So that combination of nutrients are synergistic and they help reverse insulin resistance. And then we also address the microbiome in a variety of ways. By the way, the least important thing in your list of things to do for a healthy microbiome is take a commercial probiotic
Mhm.
because people think
Mhm.
that's the solution. It's not the solution, not even close
Mhm.
to the solution. The most important thing you could do is avoid all those things we talked about and then include fermented foods as you do. Kimchi, kombucha, kefirs, yogurts, fermented veggies. And this can be a very low cost process. And if someone doesn't want to bother fermenting veggies on their kitchen counter. You can buy commercial ones now. The only thing I tell people though is if you buy commercially fermented, let's say kefir or kimchi or sauerkraut, let it sit on your counter, kitchen counter. For I would do a minimum of 48 hours, if not an entire week, because when you get something commercially produced, they always go as fast as they can for volume and profit. So we get it, let it sit, let it ferment further. I've never had any problems doing that. But
So,
fermented foods are the most important thing to do.
I completely agree. And with that, because if you buy sauerkraut or something in a jar, that's heat treated to be sealed and sterilized. So you definitely want to buy the ones that aren't heat treated, that have the live cultures. Unfortunately, they're in plastic, but I mean, it's not the end of the world. Yeah, I get these. There's like certain sauerkrauts that are fresh, not heat treated and sealed. So then even those, do you want to leave those out on the counter and open it?
You mean that stuff in brine and vinegar?
Yeah, like if you there's a sauerkraut that I get that it's a plastic container, it's not heat treated, it's still live, but then do you want to leave that out on the counter like open to the air to do another 48 hours?
No. So what I would do is get, let's say, a sauerkraut that says live cultures or fermented,
Mm-hmm.
and leave it capped. You can loosen the cap because fermentation produces gases. You don't want any explosions, but leave that out,
Mm.
and that will ferment further. Now, I don't know if they fermented it from microbes resident on the surface of the cabbage or they added a starter culture. And you can do both ways, by the way. You can make sauerkraut or any other fermented food for that matter, either relying on the microbes resident on the surface of that vegetable, or you can ferment from a starter culture and pick your microbe.
Mm.
You can even get commercial starting cultures that are a mix of microbes. Fermenting microbes are a little bit different than some of the microbes we talked about for yogurt. If you rely on the resident microbes, you get species like Leuconostoc mesenteroides or Pediococcus pentasaceus. And those are a little bit different, but they're still very important. And the Sonnenbergs, Erica and Justin, the husband wife team at Stanford, did publish a very important paper about a year ago that showed among the most important molders of the microbiome are fermented foods, frequent
Mm.
consumption of fermented foods. But the odd thing is, the species in fermented foods are not the species that take up residence in your GI tract. So if you got Leuconostoc and Pediococcus, they only pass through, but they somehow open the door for other healthy microbes. It's not quite clear how they do that. And so you have a bloom in other healthy
Mm.
species just by getting these fermenting microbes.
I love it. Just look back to our past. I also love that you say don't reduce calories too. I hate the whole like calorie thing. Maybe do another minute on calories, and you're not trying to reduce calories. You're trying to eat the correct foods, and then your whole body works better, and you naturally can lose weight.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Brian. So the standard American diet or the diet advocated by Health and Human Services or the USDA,
Mm.
you include grains, lots of grains. Well, that's an appetite stimulant. It's got the gliadin-derived opioid peptide effect. And people who cut fat. Well, fat is satiating. So the diet they advocate, conventional diet, is a setup for hunger, incessant hunger,
Hmm.
obesity, weight gain, and other health problems. So let's take away gliadin-derived opioid peptides that come from wheat and related grains. Let's not restrict fat. Let's eat more eggs. Let's have more butter. Let's eat the fat on your pork. Let's eat the skin on chicken. I cringe, Brian, when I see people saying, "Oh, boneless, skinless chicken breast, the
Mm.
dopiest piece of meat possible." You
No.
want the skin, you want the dark meat, you want the bones. Save
Hmm.
the bones to make soups or something. And so when you do that, appetite normalizes to serve your need. And you don't have to say, "Oh, push the plate away, fewer cat, too much fat, too much cat." All
Mm.
that nonsense goes away. It's self-regulating. That's why, as you saw, there's no fat Hadza. There's no fat Yanomami.
Hmm.
And there's no fat possums. There's no fat raccoons. There's no fat squirrels. Same thing.
Only the animals that we feed. Yeah, if a squirrel got into if lives off your human trash food, then that's the only time they're overweight. The pets, the only time f- animals that we feed, and we are animals that we feed ourselves this garbage food. Oh man, so good talking to you. I think the wrap up message that I took the biggest takeaway from reading your book is yes, you can use keto carnivore. You can use things as tools. I mean, you don't say this in the book, but I'm saying this. There are tools of, doing restriction and, feeling better, losing weight, but add stuff back in, don't just rely on this severe, restriction to just meat as like a lifetime thing. And I've seen so many people around me go that route, and then they start adding foods back in, and that's when their health really starts to bloom.
Couldn't agree more, Brian.
All right, where can people find you? Find your book? You have a website, social media? What do you have?
So the Super Gut book is everywhere: Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Amazon, of course. I post a lot of stuff on my drdavisinfinitehealth.com, where I have a very busy blog. There's a discussion forum. There's also an inner circle. It's
Mm.
innercircle.drdavisinfinitehealth.com, which is a membership site, but where we put a lot of time and effort. So last night, for instance, I had a 2 hour two-way Zoom with about 80
Mm.
people, and we talk about these kinds of things. We also learn, one of the things we do, Brian, is learn new things. For instance, the Lactobacillus rhodori and, by the way, Lactobacillus casei shirota, another microbe, are two incredibly effective sleep aids, restoring these microbes, and you sleep like I do, sleep like a
Mm-hmm.
baby.
Yeah.
Well, this has never been described in the science. And so we experience this as a collaborative community, and we learn that we can manipulate certain microbes for sleep effects. I also report some of our findings. I have a mouse trial going on. We're trying to optimize our choice of rhodori strain. We have a human trial going on now to validate the magnitude of skin effects, the increase in dermal thickness, using a method called high resolution skin ultrasound. And we
Mm.
have several other trials planned so that I also deliver to you cutting edge,
Mm.
novel observations that you can't get anywhere because we're doing the science. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's all in drdavisinfinitehealth.com and
Mm-hmm.
innercircle.drdavisinfinitehealth.com.
Well, that's so cool. I love that you're still doing this stuff. You're still doing some research and just pushing forward always, and helping the community. Wow, great stuff. Let me know if you're in Austin, and thanks so much.
Will do, Brian. Thank you for all you're doing, because what you're doing, what I'm doing, is no longer welcome on national broadcast TV nor print. They don't allow people like us on there anymore because we say things contrary to the interests of big pharma. And
Oh,
so
I know. I've
so I
had,
applaud you for
yeah.
doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I hope I make it to the mainstream. I hope Netflix actually, accepts my Food Lies 6-part series. And yes, I have had friends.
That's terrific. That is
Yeah,
so cool.
yeah. Well, let's wrap it up for there. And thank you.
Thank you, Brian.